Let's go. Hello, everybody. Oh my gosh, how did it get to be whatever day it is? December 11th. December 11th. Oh my gosh. Um, Today is well, let's just say so much for 2023. I I demand that you join us in January. On the 15th, we have Rick Ruth, who is the individual who knows the most of anyone in the world about the history in the United States of public diplomacy. Let me just a word about Rick. He's quite a phenomenon. He's not an extrovert. He could have been ambassador. They asked him many times, but he felt it was more important um, to maintain the process of public diplomacy during times when politically it didn't seem as if it might exist. And he was in the background, uh, cultivating his contacts on Capitol Hill, people like Paul Foldy, who we met last week. And Rick did a history. Where did public diplomacy start? Shortly after World War II. He has a wonderful, there's a little video which I will post on the Google Classroom. I'm writing it down, which it just they took an audio recording of Rick giving a lecture at one point, and then somebody illustrated the whole thing. It's quite amusing. I will put up that video, which has an audio, which gives the entire history of public diplomacy. That's Rick Ruth, who will join us on January 15th. One more word about Rick. You know, in naming a bureau, it's a big bureaucratic question. Who gets to name a bureau? If it's a very important bureau, it gets a single letter. Like M would be the undersecretary for management. P would be the undersecretary for political affairs, and under that come all of the different geographic regions. When it came time to name the bureau in 1999, after the end of U.S. Information Agency, they couldn't find a name, and so Rick Ruth said, "Name it after me," and that bureau to this day is called R, the letter R, after Rick Ruth. So come and join us on January 15th. On a more serious and somber note, the leading American diplomat working on war crimes prosecution is Ambassador Beth Van Schaak. She will join us on January 29th. So I'm just trying to lure you. Please stay with us. Now today is going to be, we call it a slog. It's going to be maybe a bit long. I just want to summarize the best I can everything we've heard. Now, of course, that's impossible. So what I want to do is begin with this slide. I've talked about this a few times with you. I've just posted it on Google Classroom. This is your vademecum, if you know what that is. A vademecum is a reminder of the basics that you would take with you everywhere in life. Keep it under your pillow at night. Take it into the meeting room when you are dealing with a crisis. This, I've told you before, this is my summary of a 2-week course, 2 weeks full time, 8 hours times 10, that's 80 hours. And I summarized everything I heard into these 2 pages. Now, so you can't remember everything. So here is again, it's a vademecum. It's on your Google Classroom. You don't have to be photographing the screen. You may if you want. But here are the steps. Nobody's really formalized this process. But when there is a crisis, let's say civil war has broken out in Sudan, which is very sadly very much the case. You have military factions, egos, horrible people, usually men, just fighting and fighting. And you've been asked to try to improve, or you cannot solve a problem like this, but you can manage it. That's the point of this course, crisis management. So to do that, where do you go first? First, identify the problem. We call that a situational analysis. To identify who's causing the problem, the conflict drivers, we call them. Who can you turn to? You can't just walk into Sudan and solve a problem by yourself. You need to turn to somebody. And these, as I've said before, these could be women's groups, religious leaders, civic organizations. You need to quickly find out who would be able to help you in solving or resolve or managing, not solving, managing the issue. Identify the negatives. Why is there a problem? In the case of a, let's say, a failed state in the global south, there are legitimate grievances. Boko Haram in Nigeria, they do terrible things. But if we can understand, what is it that motivates them? Well, the complete disregard of the government of Nigeria to do anything useful. This gives an excuse, a pretext for these horrible murderers to come in and to make a popular appeal. And they do this very effectively through disinformation, through bribery, through threatening. Who becomes a child soldier? Nobody becomes a child soldier by choice, but take a 12-year-old boy who's starving, give him some food and tell him, here's your gun, kill those people. This is how child soldiers are created. So why is there an issue? The government of Nigeria has failed and failed and failed. So at least you cannot fix that, but at least you can understand why it is that terrorists have the ability to destroy what's left of a broken society. Okay. Defining moments. Was there a certain moment, let's say they've killed and burned many villages. Was there a certain moment when the trouble became suddenly unbearable? They had to do something about it. Sometimes just identifying that in time and place can be helpful. And then just as important, what are the positives? What is it in the society that might be able to address this problem other than terrorism? What are the mitigating factors? Mitigating factors are elements that you might be able to identify that could assist in bringing down the problem. Sometimes, as an outsider, you cannot solve a problem, but you can provide the tipping point, the Wendepunkt, as the Baron von Clausewitz called it, the tipping point. Sometimes an outsider can distract from these horrible, apparently permanent conflicts, and can have a convening power and can say, if you trust me, let's go into a room, enemies, let's go into a room and see if we can agree on anything. And would there be a defining moment for decreasing the conflict? Is there any event where a women's group said to boy soldiers, not here, do not kill? I mean, can you identify something? Okay, so identify, first of all, what is the problem? What is the problem? This is absolutely necessary, indispensable. Identify the problem. It may seem obvious. It may seem like a stupid question, but you have to do it. What is the problem? In Sudan, you have two egomaniacs with weapons, and I think that they're just simply egos wanting to control a country. This is sadly, this happens very often. But when and where did they start fighting? Today's news, by the way, the two individuals in Sudan who are fighting have agreed to sit down. I think in Qatar. Qatar seems to be the place to go to have mediation, right? It often is the place. They've agreed to go there. Is this reason for optimism? Many times. We've seen people go to Qatar. They negotiate, they have a nice meal, they go home, and they start fighting again. So, but thanks, Qatar, for giving it a try. Now, you identify the problem. Then you say, well, what are my options? Am I able? Do nothing is always an option. That's what we mainly do in the world, that we do nothing. Are we doing anything in Cambodia, in Myanmar, in Sichuan province of China, where there may be a form of genocide going on? Most often, most countries and the United Nations will do nothing. Now, sometimes that's the best thing to do. But this is something you need to talk through when we're employing strategy. As we've been reminded by many speakers, strategy is not a solution. It is unlikely to work exactly as you planned it, but you must have a strategy. Without one, there's no way you can succeed in managing a crisis. These are some of the other options. Maybe you don't see any way of getting them to stop fighting, but you can at least feed the people. This is very much what's happening right now in Sudan, by the way. The UN organizations, the Food and Agricultural Organization, the World Food Program, they're all trying to get into Sudan where the people are starving. It's a terrible challenge because the military very often blocks them. They say, no, you cannot come in. Where are your papers? Give me a bribe. These things are horrible. I hope that you have, as a group, you have demonstrated you're very good at this. And I hope that soon, not someday, but soon, you will have positions of responsibility where you will be asked to deal with these situations. And so here's your 2-page vademecum, like, what do I do? Well, I think this kind of answers in a minimal sort of way that question. What are your options? Do nothing, maintain aid, engage in intense diplomatic mission. This probably would not work in Sudan. It certainly would not work with Russia. In some places, it might work, where IGAD, the Intergovernmental Group, forget what it stands for. It's a group of 7 or 8 countries in the Horn of Africa. It's kind of a mini African Union, just for the region of the Horn of Africa. It's IGAD that has convinced the 2 warring parties in Sudan to go to Qatar and just talk it out. Sometimes leadership in the neighboring countries. Eastern Congo, terrible mess right now. Neighboring country, Rwanda. I think Rwanda is a source of the problem, but you can always appeal to their positive, as Lincoln said, their angels. Every person has an angel buried somewhere within their evil character. Sometimes you can go to a neighboring country, Rwanda, in the case of Democratic Republic of Congo, and say, let's sit down. We know that you're doing some things in Eastern Congo. We know why. You really want the chromium and the coltan. What if we made an arrangement? Sometimes talking can help. Trade-offs. Is there something you can give to the person or the party that's creating the crisis? Are there issues more urgent than this one? Very important. The beginning and the end of your process. The beginning, you must define the problem. It may seem obvious, it may seem stupid to even do such a thing. You must do it. Likewise, you must think of what would be the end, as the American military puts it. What would success look like? There's no such thing as 100% or 0 in the real world. So can you define your end goal? Many of you have done this very, very well in some of your assignments, and I know you're going to be good at this. What would success look like? That's a military term. In other words, Rwanda, I believe, is doing some terrible things in Eastern Congo where the precious minerals are. Maybe you cannot remove Rwanda entirely, but maybe you can reduce from 1,000 deaths per month to 300. Okay, you see, incrementally. In the real world, there's no 100% and there's no zero. What would success look like? Define it in numbers and time. Okay. Risks. You must, as almost every speaker has reminded us, when doing a strategy, I think Lawrence Friedman has told us this, Michael Kimmich has told us this, many of our speakers, I think John Arkila has said, when you're creating a strategy, within the strategy, you must imagine, how might the strategy fail? Who would work against it? Imagine, Brett Bruen was very strong on this. When we're working out a strategy, we must imagine what will come up in the way. You can't just expect free rein, and you cannot expect to just walk in and solve a problem. But will there be, let's say in the case of the US government, would there be congressional opposition? Would there be political opposition? We see, I'm so disheartened by what happened in the Congress last week in terms of aid to Ukraine. I'm confident, as we know, Volodymyr Zelensky is coming from Buenos Aires to Washington, I think today, to talk to President Biden. And I so much admire him for never giving up. The Congress, I won't say they betrayed him. The Congress showed their idiotic nature by avoiding an obligation that they have, not just for Ukraine, for the United States, for Europe. It's disgraceful what they did last week. Well, President Zelensky is in Washington or on his way. He was here 10 days ago, talking with the Senate. He's going to talk this time just with the Senate, because the Senate seems to be the blocking point. He's very smart. He never gives up. Major mission elements, as stated above. What are the factors creating the conflict, and what would be your ideas to resolve them? What are your resource requirements? If you need economic or military assistance or humanitarian assistance, figure out, what do you want? Do you want $100 million from the United Nations, from the UN Development Fund, from USAID, from the EU? Do you want 50 million? Figure out, you won't get what you ask for, but you need to make, we call it the ask. We use it as a substantive, as a noun. The ask should be specific. It should have numbers in it. I need 200 Sherman tanks. Maybe you'll get 150, but ask for a certain number. And I need them within 1 month. Always attach a time to the quantity. Again, risks, and then repeating who would oppose your policy, what are your resources, and metrics. We've talked about input, output, outcome, result. I won't repeat that whole spiel, but you can go back to it has been recorded on video, my little spiel about input, output, outcome, result. This is metrics. Metrics means when you ask for resources, be specific with numbers and time. When you are at the end of the process, you've said, this is all I can do, now the EU must take over, something like that, then your success or failure will be judged by metrics. Can you demonstrate that in the case of Eastern Congo, 1,000 per month killed, did you succeed in getting it down to 300? Did you do so within 4 months or 5 months? That's metrics, very crucial. So define the problem, imagine the outcome that you would want, and insert metrics. And here's input. Now, I won't bother going through this. I just posted it on Google Classroom. So you have this, you can print it. What is it, 2 pages? A page and a half. I think this is a summary of anything you would need. Now, this will take a bit of time, forgive me, but I'm going to go through the entire course, and I want to thank. Let me make sure I thank people. I want to thank Anastasia Svistula, Oskar Nkulu, and Peter Mbuva for doing basically what I'm about to do. All three of those individuals submitted wonderful final papers with a summary of everything we've heard. Now, just for, yes, that's right. Applause for those three. So, which of course confuses me because I have my notes and I have their notes, but I'm going to try to make this brief. And then, first of all, I want to thank a few people here. At the end of this, maybe a little bit long summary of everything we've heard, that I want to go to the screen again and show you a concept which I call diplomacy as gardening. And I want to show you actual images. George F. Kennan loved Chekhov. Chekhov planted a garden knowing he would never live to see the garden blossom because he knew that he was going to die of, I think it was tuberculosis. He planted the garden. I will repeat this at the end of this talk. I believe that, I expect that some people on this call will become diplomats. Diplomacy, many of our speakers have emphasized this. You don't turn a switch. You invest in a relationship. You may not see the results, maybe even in your lifetime, in the case of George F. Kennan. But if you plant the seeds and if you're patient, this was a point underscored very much by Lawrence Friedman, Sir Lawrence Friedman. Be patient. Do what you can. Do not have the arrogance to expect immediate results. Begin a process, create a relationship. And this seems to be the secret of successful diplomacy. We're putting diplomacy in here as one mechanism, but it's a very important one in managing a crisis. Now, a crisis can happen in a family, in an industrial firm, in a stock market, but we're looking at nation state. We can't do all of that, but we want to remind ourselves the same principles apply in all sorts of human situations. It can be a troubled personal relationship. It can be a business that whose output or whose sales are down. It can be a troubled stock market where we don't understand why, but the value of money is going down, or even currency value. That can be a crisis also. So again, we're talking in terms of diplomacy only because it's the one subject we have time to deal with in this course. Now, because I may forget later, I want to thank incredibly, I'm so indebted to the following people. First of all, Ellie Klein, who you see on the screen. She's amazing, and she's made all of this happen. I see many smiles, Ellie. They seem to like you. I don't know how that happened.
Thank
Leah
you.
Pedro, who sometimes joins us and who may be with us now, I'm not sure. Without Leah's inspiration and, frankly, her arguing, she argued for this course. This course would not exist without Leah Pedro. Thank you, Leah. Jack said Kulik may be on this call. I don't know. But his 3 lectures were absolutely amazing. His PowerPoint, the history of U.S. diplomacy, the element of cross-cultural communication. I'm not going to attempt to summarize these things. These were extremely valuable sessions, which I have watched 3 times because even at my age and after an entire career in diplomacy, I still have much to learn. Or let's say I have filaments, I have stray elements in my mind, but to get them together and usable and remembered, Jack has been tremendous in doing that. Special thanks to Polina Dornikova, who was a star student in 2022 and who has stayed with us. She created the Google Classroom site we've had. She has advised me and given me good counsel. And she has been a mentor to me and to many others. Thanks also, Erjan Isabayev in Almaty. You rallied your students. You created an entire new system at Narcos University. You made it possible for your students to get academic credit for this course. And we have a relationship. And Erjan, I hope to see you in March. I'll just leave that. Thank you, Patrick Maluki, for bringing in Kenya. Is it not amazing that we have Kazakhstan and Kenya working together on something? Would this be the first time in human history? Patrick Maluki, you've made that possible. If Srđan Darmanovic is here, he's brought in Montenegro, a small country, but a very key country in the Balkans, where the political outcome, it's a bit, we don't know what's going to happen in Montenegro. We have factions pulling this small but pivotal country in opposite directions. Srđan Darmanovic was ambassador to Washington and later foreign minister of his country. Thank you, Srđan. Thank you, Oscar Nkulu, for representing the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Wow, Oscar, you did this by yourself. I'm so delighted, and I really hope we can bring in more DRC people in the future. Thank you to our mentors, Shintaro Watanabe, Polina Dvornikova, Anna Maria Mansi, Daria Horobets, Ivan Borsov. You've been amazing. You have been, you have cultured, you have curated our groups. Your only real advantage is you did this a year before everybody else. Now we're all together. We're all at the same level of knowledge, largely thanks to you, our mentors. Okay. And then hoping that you will join us in January through early May. Again, on Google Classroom, you'll see we're 90% certain we're going to switch from webinar to Zoom. I've posted the Zoom link. It should be there 2 or 3 times on your Google Classroom. Please give it a try. You never know about these links. Sometimes there are blockers, or it says, you must ask Microsoft for your permission. I don't know. Just try going into that link just so that we can be poised and ready. 10 o'clock, Washington time, January 15th. Now, okay, here we go. If this gets to be impossibly long, I'll just cut it off. But again, let's say this will, for the archives, here's what we've got. Dan Whitman, I think that's me. In the first couple of sessions, we talked about the principles of crisis management. We talked about strategy, tactics, policy, input, output, outcome, result. Ambassador Oksana Markarova joined us. She was inspirational. I don't know how she's thinking these days after what happened in the Congress last week. She's a person like her president who never gives up. She never gives up. And she will always say, we know Ukraine is going to win. As a statement of faith, that's a very impressive statement. Do we know? Can we know? Can we absolutely know what's going to happen? I'm not going to argue otherwise, but the person who best articulates this idea is Ambassador Oksana Markarova. She's the most active and the most effective ambassador in Washington, D.C. of 190 some countries. She's the one. We talked about the scenario which we went through. It didn't go very smoothly. in the webinar context, but you did great. You represented different countries, Bhutan, Gilbia, and so forth. I understand that in Kazakhstan, it went very well because they actually met in a room, which is, it works better. Someday I want to get to every place where you are, and we can do this in person. That's kind of a wish. What else did Dan Whitman say? We talked about Kennan. I'm at the very end of this session. I want to go very briefly back to Kennan. Apparently, I said, someone quoted me, we have no better judge of the things that we do than history. Did I say that? Boy, that was one of my better moments, I guess. We reminded ourselves that the simulation we were doing is not personal. And I hope you'll have a chance to do more of these. And you get it. The clashes, the disagreements, we want to act that out. It's fun actually to pretend to be the evil person or to pretend to be the good person. Pure evil and pure good, I think, do not exist. But if you ever have a chance to do an exercise like this in the future, just remember, it's not personal. You'll be arguing with your friends, and then after the simulation is over, we understand we were just doing a role play. Now, Michael Kimmich. Okay, Michael Kimmich. Okay, in my here are my notes. He said that we've made mistakes, even with regard to the current conflict. We thought that sanctions might work, but we were too optimistic. Kimmich reminded us, you're going to make mistakes, learn from them, and never be optimistic. Never be up. Now, I can't say that to Ambassador Markarova because that's her whole nature, is her optimism. But as normal, mortal actors in a crisis situation, don't be optimistic. Imagine the problems, imagine the obstacles that can come along. Kimmich said regarding Ukraine, we totally misjudged Russia. We did not understand how radical President Putin was going to be. We thought he was a rational person, but he's crazy. So don't be optimistic. I have that written down several times. Just some quotes from him. War is local, but its impact is global. Very obvious, yes, with the grain production and the transport of grain from Ukraine and Russia to the rest of the world. If the Black Sea is not navigable, the conflict may be local, the consequences are global. He said regarding global, young people do a much better job than I could. Good, Michael, you're quite right. Sometimes, he reminded us, formal negotiations get stuck because people are posing and they're grandstanding and they're saying things that they hope the press will pick up. But sometimes the back channel, that's the name of a book, by the way, of William Burns, current director of the CIA, was ambassador to Moscow at one point. His autobiography is called The Back Channel. Sometimes people can say things, if you know that it's not being recorded and it's out of the public view, you might make more progress. So that's Kimmich. Kimmich cited Kennan as the containment policy. We know about that. He talked about the necessity for self-criticism. I think I just said that, but don't be easy on yourself. Understand with candor and transparency, what are your weaknesses and what actions have you taken that did not work? Kimmich said that President Zelensky, someone asked him, how is his public diplomacy? Forget who asked. And he said, I don't need ammunition, I need a ride. One of the great phrases of the 21st century. He had the highest regard for President Zelensky. Then we had Sir Lawrence Friedman, who is, I would say, the world expert on the topic of strategy, the author of that 800-page book. He reminded us that in a crisis, by definition, a crisis is urgent, that we do not have time. A crisis forces us to go one way or the other. So we need to, as we go into a crisis, we need to understand we don't have time. We must do our thinking now in this session so as to, when there is a crisis, you kind of know how to engage in it. Don't expect total success ever, and don't expect that your actions have no flaws in them. Don't be optimistic. Do the best you can, include metrics, and then hope for the best. He talked about two ways of addressing problems. One is intuitive and one is deliberative. Dictators engage in strategy intuitively. We can all think of certainly one example, and there are many others. Dictators address strategies intuitively. A more effective way of developing a strategy is with deliberative actions, meaning in the US system, which seems so clumsy and so unable to act at times, and yet if you have the National Security Council, the Congress, the State Department, the American public, the press, the think tanks, they're all bringing, it creates a terrible mess. However, the outcome in the long run is likely to be more successful if you have a deliberative process where you don't have a single individual making all the decisions, but rather a team of people, could be private sector, NGO, think tank, legislative, executive. The more people you involve, it'll be very slow, it'll be very awkward, but it has a greater chance of success. Yes, Friedman made the distinction between a plan and a strategy. You need to have a plan, but what a strategy does is imagine what might go wrong, okay? A strategy imagines the obstacles, the confrontation that might come along. This is the best way to think about how to manage a crisis. Notice I keep using the word manage, not resolve. Crises develop in stages, he said. There is never a final stage in a crisis. Now, never. There may be some examples. You could disprove this, but the idea that a crisis has phases, it's not a single moment. It may seem like you go left or you go right, but it's never that simple. And a final stage, you may never see it. Again, planting the garden. Crisis is dynamic. Crisis, rather strategy, some basic elements that we sometimes overlook: deception and coalition building. You know, this is not ethical and moral stuff. This is survival talk. Deception. Convince your opponent, as Sun Tzu says, if you're weak, pretend to be strong. If you're strong, pretend to be weak. The ape with the banana, you've got all that. The ability to understand how another person thinks. We call that empathy, and we know that empathy is not sympathy. Empathy is the ability to understand what in the world is Putin thinking. We may never know, but we have to ask that question. What is that? Does he really believe that he can reconstruct what we used to call the Russian Empire? If so, why? Is it ego? Is it, I mean, we know he's wrong, but what might he be thinking? You really need to work that into any strategy that might have a chance of success. Now, strategy is the plan you have when going into a crisis. But to survive a crisis, you do that through tactics. And I think we understand that by now. Tactics, let's say there's the invasion in Normandy, 1944, June 1944, huge operation, terrible risks. General Eisenhower did not know whether it would succeed or fail. But once the battle began, there were a million different instances of individual units or brigades or tank commanders having to make decisions in the middle of the crisis. This we call tactics. Tactics is the type of thinking you need to have on a micro level. We're not talking about Europe. We may be talking about a single village in France. The Nazis are there. We have to figure out how to destroy the bridge or whatever. And that's so tactics take us through, even though this sounds like sophistry or semantics, we need to understand, in order to function effectively, you need to understand the difference. Strategy is a plan. Strategy is not a plan. You have a plan which includes strategy. Strategy is the awareness that your plan may fail. This is big thinking. Little thinking. We need to destroy the bridge in this little French village, okay? Tactics involve innovation, rapid actions. Strategy is timeless. Strategy can be forever. Maybe Putin has a strategy. It's crazy, but he may have a strategy. Why does he think the reconstruction of a Russian empire would serve anybody's interest, including the interests of the Russian people? Can't imagine. But clearly what he's thinking is not for tomorrow, it's not for next year, it's forever. It's forever. That's strategy. It's timeless. Remember that Friedman has a Substack called Comment is Freed. He invited us all to go on to that. I don't know if anybody has done so. We talked about, okay, let's go straight to Robert Gates. Gates went straight to Q&A, right? He reminded us that a free society where dialogue is permitted, you don't go to jail for having an idea, that free societies tend to be more successful economically, militarily, politically, than secret societies where you have one dictator making all the decisions and removing everybody who disagrees. In the long run, a dictatorship will usually fail. I say usually, there's no forever in this game. Let's see. He said to us on October 5th, it is not going to succeed. Here's a quote: the unsustainable character of efforts to impose democracy through force. Obviously, he's talking about Iraq and Afghanistan here. We know now, after these very painful, I would call them failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, that although every human being in the world, I believe, wants democracy. They want, if you define democracy, I want to have some role in determining my future. I call that democracy. We cannot impose that, not because we think people are unable to deal with that concept, but because sometimes circumstances don't allow it. You may have a radical group, maybe religious or political, making it impossible for people to realize their own individual wishes. So coming in from the outside with military force and say, you will now be democratic. The neoliberals believed that we could do this. They were wrong. I know this is taking, I'm racing here. I'm trying to race. Let's see. John Arquilla. Okay. John Arquilla talked about grand strategy. He said weapons of mass destruction are not very useful because you're probably never going to use them. You have them as a deterrent, but you know that if you're not crazy, you know that if you use poison gas or nuclear weapons, God forbid, it will destroy not only your enemy, it will ultimately destroy yourself. Everybody, mutual assured destruction, MAD, which is what kept the human race alive during the Cold War. So far, it's pretty risky because you could have a dictator who doesn't understand this or who is suicidal. It's possible. But until now, weapons of mass destruction, countries that have them, Ukraine used to until the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine voluntarily gave them up and said, but your side of the bargain, France, US, and Russia, you need to promise us our borders will always be respected. Ukraine lived up to its side of the bargain. They gave up their nuclear weapons. Russia did not. No comment. I'm so disgusted with the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine did everything. Russia did nothing. Gates talked, no, John Arkila talked about, I asked him about the rules of war. Where does this come from? I thought maybe it was from the United Nations. Something. He said, no, 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 no. It goes back to St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. Wow. He teaches at Catholic University. This was such a revelation to me. He said, Islam has similar principles. Don't kill civilians. This is what we call rules of war, which to me is a ridiculous concept. If you're going to kill somebody, is it better to kill somebody who's wearing a uniform than someone who's not wearing? This is crazy, but there are rules. We're talking about this suddenly. It's a big question in Gaza. The rules of war, to proportionality, the respect of civilians. That's a situation we've all been thinking of. I'm very certain that none of us has a solution to that. I hope we can agree that any person who needs empathy should get it, regardless of where they were born and how they think. You know, unless they're killing people, everybody in distress deserves our sympathy. So let's see. Speeding on, let's see, environment, strategic. Oh, he quoted Winston Churchill. I will walk with the devil to the other side of the bridge. Remember, when Churchill was asked, why in the world would you cooperate with the Soviet Union? Well, it's the only way to defeat Nazism. And Churchill said, I will walk with the devil to the other side of the bridge, meaning once we're across the bridge, the deal is off. I will not be a friend with the devil any longer. That's a painful truth that we all have to understand in an existential battle. We need to have allies and coalitions, even with countries we don't like. The United States has a friendly relationship with Saudi Arabia. Why? Do we love that government or that system? No, but our problem is Iran. Iran is supplying weapons, we know, to Russia. This whole thing we're talking about, someone once said, this is not meant for angels. You cannot be an angel in determining your foreign policy or in managing a crisis. Let's see. Veronica Shevtukovska asked Kimmich, are we on Kimmich? Asked, why is the UN so inefficient? And his answer was, well, they have good goals, but they have limited resources. This takes us back to Sir Lawrence Friedman, who says, what is strategy? It's the attempt to reconcile your wishes with your resources. They will never match. They will probably never match. But what strategy does is to try to bring them within reach so that you might have a chance to prevail in your struggle. He said that in 1948, there was this thing called the Genocide Convention. Very nice. Genocide, a combination of a Greek and a Latin term. Sounded good. How many genocides have we had since 1948? Far too many. So thank you, United Nations. We need the United Nations. Without sovereignty, their resources are very limited. We need to have them. We need to understand the limits of what they can do. Remember Raymond Joseph, the Haitian ambassador to Washington. He called, because we have some Africans on the call in a country which I believe in January or February, I think it's a deal. I think Kenya is going to send 1,400 armed men to Haiti to see if they can confront the gangs that are just making that country unlivable. There's a legal question. These individuals, will they be police or will they be military? And my guess is that they're going to be sent as military. Military are permitted to kill people. Police are not. And I've lived in Haiti. I believe that Haitians want military. Now they have a weak and ineffective police force. They don't have material or the tools to confront the gangs that now control 90% of the capital city, Port-au-Prince. But with Kenyans, there were actually Raymond Joseph was pessimistic. Would people be able to do this if they don't speak the local language, if they know nothing about the local culture? He was skeptical. Well, I respect his skepticism. I very much admire Raymond Joseph. Maybe it's worth trying because nothing else seems to work. He also told us that he's very much in favor of decentralization. He said one of the problems in Haiti is the central, everything is in Port-au-Prince. We used to call it the Republic of Port-au-Prince. The rest of the country is in a kind of a state of anarchy. And he said, let's think about decentralizing in a troubled country, global south, maybe a failed state. Consider alternatives to a centralized system if it's not working. And he said, please restore the army. The army was disbanded in 1995 in Haiti. And he said this was a terrible mistake. This was Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the former religious leader who decided to leave the church and be the president of his country. Lots to be said about Aristide, but he disbanded the army because it had a terrible past. It was abusing human rights and such. But Joseph said, it was a mistake. Now let's redo it. I've just made a decision. There's so much more of this to go through. I'm going to go through whatever I can get to in the next 20 minutes or so. And then I'm going to do the rest of it in January. Ha! I got you. You have to come back. Aaron Barkley, the Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, trained as a lawyer. She reminded us about the importance of track 2 diplomacy, which is the things that happen in the dans les coulisses, in the back rooms, the back channel, sometimes involving civil society or non-governmental organizations. She reminded us in a crisis, you have to have non-governmental organizations. They don't have the sovereignty, the authority to sign a treaty, but we need their knowledge and their wisdom. There's no way we can proceed without it. she pointed out the profound effect of the Human Rights Report, um, which her bureau produces every year. I think we're in December. I think it's in its final phase now and will be super edited in January. I think it comes out in February. This Human Rights Report, which when published, it's like 800 pages or more. What happens is it gets published. Everyone in the world has access to it. It's open source. And then the countries whose human rights records are not so good, the governments look at the report and they complain and they say, you're telling us we're a bad country. Well, we like that. We want them to expose themselves. Maybe the Human Rights Report is not 100% accurate, but it gets noticed big time by countries whose human rights reports are not so great. I worked on the ones for Gabon, Madagascar, and one other. You see, and it's a very formalized thing. Each report, if you have, you can look at it very easily on the internet. Each report has an identical format. Very important. When we did memos, identical format. It's not just to be bureaucratic and to be a pain in the neck. It's in this consistency of format is crucial when you're dealing with large amounts of information. Erin Barkley reminded us that, again, as we've heard, that negotiations take place internally very often. That internally and within their own bureau, like within the State Department, you have the DRL, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, who are always in conflict with the Africa Bureau, the European Bureau, the Asian Bureau, because the bureaus want to have very nice relationships with the governments of the countries that they work on. And we know that DRL is the burr in the saddle. The DRL is the bureau that will work against harmonious relations. We don't always want to have harmony with countries that are committing human rights abuses. Let's see. She argued for the importance of multilateral actions, that strategies for improving human rights, there's a bilateral element and a multilateral element. She reminded us that multilateral, that's United Nations, the EU, the Human Rights Council at the UN, that these things we forget them, they seem bureaucratic, they issue long papers, but sometimes the multilateral approach is the one most likely to succeed. Now, we go to, I don't know if Paulina Dvornikova is on the call. She did the most marvelous workshop on China. If you remember, she had a young scholar from PRC, from mainland China, and she had a young scholar from Taiwan. Not at the same time, remember that? They were saying opposite things. Remember the one from mainland China was talking about ancient Chinese notions of harmony and the human race as working together, kind of an idealistic, maybe utopian idea. Whereas the one in Taiwan was pointing out disinformation, misinformation, you know the difference, right? Misinformation, oops, I made a mistake. Disinformation, I want to deceive them. I want to pretend I'm something other than what I am. We call that mimesis, where a troll farm will give the appearance that they are private citizens when actually they are indirectly working for a government. So they pretend to be something they're not. They have, and they issue disinformation, which is intentional mistakes that will drive the viewer to let's just say will manipulate the viewer. That's disinformation. Opposite that, we had the most marvelous session on Kazakhstan, led by its professor Erjan Isabayev, and we had 6 or 7 of our wonderful Kazakh colleagues and students. We now know something about Kazakhstan. I think most of us knew mainly nothing before we heard from them. Wow, we had a tremendous background and a sense of the economy, the food, the culture, the politics. Kazakhstan is in a challenging place. They border on China. Russia is right there. The trade routes are complicated. Some of the trade routes are disrupted because of the sanctions, not only EU and American sanctions, but Russia also has sanctions. So Kazakhstan produces petroleum. They are rightly concerned. You've seen yesterday at the COP28, the oil producers, Saudi Arabia and others, were furious when the idea came up of removing fossil fuels so as to save the environment. They were furious because their lives depend on selling fossil fuels. I would say the Saudis were being amoral, not immoral, amoral, meaning put the ethics aside. We need money. We can only make money. All we have is oil. We want to be permitted to sell the oil and remain rich. Kazakhstan, I think in a more tempered way, one of the speakers did tell us, we are concerned if fossil fuels become illegal or are no longer purchased, and if there are alternatives like electric cars, this will harm the economy of Kazakhstan. It's always complicated, isn't it? Let me do one or two more, and then I will put the rest off to January. Let's see. I have lots of notes, and I hope you do too, on that wonderful series of presentations on Kazakhstan. One of them said, we have the oil reserves we have, we're very concerned they will only last 253 more years. But maybe it'll be only as much as 150. That sounds like forever, but it's not. Ruslan Petrushka, the director of the Ukrainian service of the Voice of America. Wasn't that interesting? He told us about the history of VOA, 1942, Nazi propaganda. The US government felt it had to respond, and it did, by creating the Voice of America. And later its affiliates, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. We heard Thomas Kent last week, the former director of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I hope you get the distinction. These are open source attempts to counter disinformation. Unfortunately, and this is my comment, many young people in the global South don't listen to open source stuff. They go to TikTok, which is a Chinese web. They go to Facebook. They go to things that are basically gossip. Immersed in that gossip are lies and disinformation. I love the Voice of America. I'm so glad it's there. But clearly, we need something more than simply open source information. We are reminded by Ruslan and others, Thomas Kent also, that these entities, VOA, RFE, RL, they're paid for by the US government, but they are journalistically independent. This is something many people in the world cannot understand. Putin certainly does not believe that. He believes that anything funded by the US government must be propaganda. It's not. But how do you make this argument? I mean, the fact that the US government pays creates a counter argument. The Kremlin can say, we have RT, you have VOA, it's all the same. You block, you obstruct the free flow of information when you shut down RT in your countries. Therefore, we're going to shut down your radio. It's not the same, but you see how this creates a possible argument. Maria Znamenok pointed out that in recent events, the Russian media sometimes set the agenda. That's a very powerful point. They set the agenda. Sometimes just setting the agenda is a win. You can divert people's attention to an issue. You know they have an emotional position on an issue like climate change or Gaza or the Ukraine war. But sometimes the evil media, simply by directing your attention to a topic, their work is done because they know, and they're very sophisticated. They know that people listening will have an emotional reaction. Think about Uruguay. Uruguay. Why Uruguay? Is there something happening in Uruguay? Well, disinformation can sometimes create the impression that there's something going on. Sometimes there is some truth embedded in disinformation. I think I'll go as far as Tom Pickering, and then we'll put off the rest. Pickering, wasn't he remarkable? I'm going, okay. I have, you see, I've clipped the students who've done this marvelous work, and here are my notes. Pickering, was he not fascinating? Quote, the military is a terrible way to resolve a conflict. The military almost never leads to total victory. Pickering, he's a pure diplomat. Here we can say 100%. It's one of these rare cases. Pickering really believes in diplomacy and really believes also that when a conflict becomes military, it's never going to be totally resolved. This is a very painful thing to think of right now in terms of Ukraine, but let's listen to Tom Pickering on this. He's all about finding ways to prevent a dispute before it happens. Brett Bruin made the same point. Try to predict what might go wrong. Try to predict it, and then be proactive in issuing statements or conducting actions that might prevent the conflict from happening. In the case of Brett Bruin, this has to do with commercial success. He runs a business. He's private sector. He makes a lot of money by coaching governments and corporations. What could go wrong? If you produce food, might there be food poisoning in your restaurant? If so, get the coupons ready. Get it ready. Get the coupons ready so that people can have free sandwiches once you've fixed up the food poisoning issue. In a geopolitical sense, could we have avoided an invasion of Ukraine? Well, many have made the argument that the West never really believed, even though the CIA knew this and they said it publicly, there will be an invasion. There were too many people who thought this cannot happen. It's crazy. Putin would not do such a crazy thing. Well, he did. So predicting a crisis is a great virtue. It's great to do that. Pickering was all about that. He talked about Bill Burns's book, which I mentioned today, called Back Channel. I urge you to get this book. Bill Burns is a very smart guy. He's now the CIA director, was once ambassador to Moscow. His book, The Back Channel, it's largely about the JCPOA, the Joint Plan of Action for Iran. We have your money in blocked bank accounts. You are developing nuclear weapons. Let's talk. And in secret and outside of the limelight, they met in Geneva, and they met many times under Wendy Sherman, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs for John Kerry. It's John Kerry who really pulled off the JCPOA. And the deal was, we allow the money to be unblocked in these accounts. The money belongs to you, but it's blocked in bank accounts. In return, you stop your nuclear development. Bill Burns was in the background during these negotiations, and his account in his book Back Channel is really fascinating. I think we've reached a point. I know the longer this goes, the less you're going to remember, less I'm going to remember. Just finishing with Pickering. Military action is a dysfunctional way to approach international problems, for it tends to contain the seeds of destruction. Open the door to diplomacy, he said. Now, this may sound utopian and naive in the crisis we now have in Ukraine and Gaza, but let's keep Pickering in mind as the voice. Let's remember, diplomacy is always there. It's sometimes obscured in the background during a very emotional conflict, but there it is. He said very openly, he was U.S. ambassador to the United Nations at the time when the first Gulf War took place. This is George Bush Sr. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, George Bush Sr. Was able to get the Security Council to permit, and all means necessary, you know that term, all means necessary. That's UN language for military intervention. And Pickering was very proud that there was an international consensus in 1991, I think it was. The second invasion under Bush Jr. was ill-conceived, was a failure, and was a perfect example of how not to do strategy. Also, and he said very openly that we knew, or we now know, let's put it that way, we now know that weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which was the pretext for that second invasion, did not exist. So Pickering was quite open and frank about the terrible mistakes that the US government has made. I want to stop at this point and show you a couple of slides on the screen. We're going to, I think I'm going to redo the January 15th session. I'm going to see if Rick Lewis could come maybe the following week so that I could have some more comments just to sum up, and then this becomes a archival document. Let me try to share screen and show you one other thing. And this drives me crazy. Let's see, get rid of that. Okay, there we go. Now, you know, we never made it through the Kennan presentation. Let me just make one point about Kennan. Look at this quote. This is Kennan's own description of his own emotional reaction when, in 1958, he went to see the play The Cherry Orchard by Anton Chekhov. Let me read this. When he went that evening, Kennan was a very neurotic, emotionally challenged person. But here's what we know from his diary. Oops. It stirred that the play, Chekhov, stirred all the rusty, untuned strings of the past and of my own youth. Riga, the Russian landscape, the staggering, unexpected familiarity and the convincingness of the Chekhovian world. It stirred up my Russian self, which is entirely a Chekhovian self. I remind you, he hated Stalin. He hated the Kremlin. He loved the Russian people. He could have been wrong, but that was his emotional sense. Much more genuine than the American. He's saying Chekhovian. What he means is the simple people of Russia, the peasants, and also the middle class. Never mind the Kremlin, never mind that, but the middle class and the peasants. He had a tremendous sympathy. My Chekhovian self, much more genuine than the American one. And having all this prodded to the surface in me, I sat there blubbering like a child, weeping, that is, and trying desperately to keep the rest of the company from noticing it. Kennan had this enormous emotional reaction to Chekhov. Chekhov was a gardener. He was a medical doctor, he was a playwright, but he was a gardener. He planted, again, I made this point many times, he planted a garden and he knew he would never see the outcome, but he planted it. And there's some incredibly beautiful photos. It still exists, I think, in Melichovo. This notion of planting a garden as the basis of diplomacy. Kennan, Chekhov. Chekhov, playwright. Kennan, strategy. Same thing. Patience, planting a garden, waiting for the outcome. Nicholas Burns, not William Burns, Nicholas Burns, now ambassador to China, was talking when George Shultz died at the age of 101. Burns published a piece in Foreign Affairs called "The Diplomat as Gardener." And maybe it's worth it's not too long. Everybody loved George Shultz. George Shultz was a gardener, the same way Kennan was, the same way Chekhov was. It was his service over 6.5 years as Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State that was his crowning achievement in public life. Taking office in 1982, at a time of deep tension and division in the Cold War, Shultz was the primary architect of Reagan's confrontational posture towards Moscow and the major US defense buildup that the Soviets ultimately could not match. Shultz was not building up the military, Reagan was. Shultz played an essential role in his talks with Edward Shevardnadze, his counterpart in the Soviet Union. They became very friendly, these two. Again, back channel. They had many meetings. They met privately. They ate meals together. On the one hand, the Reagan military buildup. On the other hand, the development of a relationship with Edward Shevardnadze. Yet following Mikhail Gorbachev's appointment as Communist Party General Secretary in 1985 and the launch of the reformist policies of Glasnost and Perestroika, Shultz detected earlier than Reagan and most others in Washington that this was a genuine opportunity to transform the long and contentious relationship with the Kremlin. Would Shultz be happy to see what Putin is doing now? He would be devastated. He would be furious. But let's take moments in history for what they are. Shultz and Bush Sr., and we give Reagan the credit. In my opinion, it was really Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush, and his relationship with Gorbachev, which was a garden. He planted a garden. And the result was the end of the Cold War. We should probably more correctly say the end of that moment in the Cold War, because clearly we're in a very bad situation now. But in 1991, things look pretty good. And I think I'll just conclude with this wonderful picture of this wonderful man. We worked for him. We believed in him. He believed in us. And he believed in diplomacy, just like Pickering, just like Kennan. He believed that the long strategy, call it grand strategy, you won't see success today, but you might see it at some point in the future. I think with that, Ellie, we have to say we're beginning to get people tired out. I think we'll conclude with today. And it just occurred to me a few minutes ago, I'm going to try to bribe you or threaten you. I want you back in January. And so we will continue this in January. I'm so grateful for your incredible work, your wonderful participation in these dialogues. Your questions and your comments brought out the best in our speakers. You did that. I didn't do that. You did that. They loved interacting with you. Your papers were magnificent. Ellie, I don't know if we have news on possibly some kind of publication in the future. We're looking at that. We'll see what happens. We might have some news in January. Please find the link for the Zoom communications. 90% chance we'll be using that rather than webinar. And I think I'll say goodbye. S Novim Godom. And you're an amazing group. It's been fantastic, and it will continue in January. Don't leave us. Stay with us in January. Mondays only, no assignments, some suggested readings, but nothing assigned because you are busy people. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kazakhstan. Thank you, Kenya. Thank you, DRC. Thank you, Montenegro. Bringing this all together. We've created a new genre. I mean, the Kazakh-Kenya axis. Dmytro Gadomsky, thank you. And you know what I want of you, and I want you to make it happen January or February. We'll keep it between us, but Anastasia, thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's been great. Stay in touch. I will always be delighted to get emails from you in any form. Thank you, Ellie. You're looking good on the screen. You look great. Maximum occupancy, 6 persons. We had 57. Okay. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Lovely to meet you.